Well, Kevin, I don't know if you'll be able to find a smart transition between being in the weeds of the platform to globalization, but I'm not going to even try. So this might be a session that will actually be useful to go back to the recording, since it was kind of like packed with a lot of stuff. So don't forget that you'll have the recording available to you. In the interest of time, I will not steal any more time from Kevin Lomangino, who will talk about globalization. And Kevin, you may want to start with an introduction, since you're new to this group.
Great. Let me throw my slides up. Is that working for everybody?
Yeah, we're looking at the notes view though. So you probably want the other view.
Is that better?
That's it. Yeah, that's better.
Okay.
Thank you, Kevin.
Great. So good morning. Kevin Lomangino. I'm the Director of Market Research and Development within the KGL Consulting team. And so our team collects and analyzes data from the marketplace to help our clients make better decisions for their publishing programs. And usually we're dealing with societies that are publishing scholarly journals. So that could be surveys, could be data analytics, new product development, could be monitoring trends and then benchmarking trends, which is what we're going to be talking about today, which is globalization. And I'm also with my colleague, Cara Rivera, who heads up the consulting team. Hi, Cara. So globalization is certainly not a new trend. It's been around for decades. We know it's been happening. But I would argue that the impact of globalization is increasing, and we are certainly seeing it affect a broader swath of our clients in consulting in a more significant way. And I think that's why it's a timely opportunity to discuss exactly what we're seeing, so that hopefully you all can be a little bit better prepared. So that's what we're going to do. So we'll talk about the impact of globalization on journal publishing. We'll talk a little bit about how to optimize your journals to succeed in an increasingly global environment. And I'll try to leave a few minutes at the end here for questions. And I would encourage everybody to drop your ideas and questions in the chat, and we'll try to address those at the end. Or maybe Cara will respond in real time if possible. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What is globalization? And I wanted to give some different perspectives on the issue because it means different things depending on your perspective. So one definition from the World Health Organization is globalization is the increased interconnectedness and interdependence of peoples and countries. So the world's getting smaller. We're increasingly connected. Obviously, the internet has had a lot to do with that, but this has been something going on for many decades. One could argue centuries. But those connections are getting only stronger as time goes by. So here's something from the economist Robert Reich. Globalization and free trade do spur economic growth, and they lead to lower prices on many goods. And I think this is a perspective that most of us of a certain age can appreciate, even in our own lives with our experience as consumers, how a lot of manufacturing has moved overseas and how that has impacted the prices that we pay at the grocery store or on Amazon or wherever. Now, I think there's a case to be made that has allowed us to realize more value for our purchases. Obviously, there could be a downside to that as well. But I think on balance, we'd argue that that's been a good thing. And hopefully in the countries where some of this manufacturing has moved to, it's serving a benefit to lift up the standard of living in those places. And again, that's not uniform, but that's certainly something that we'd hope to see. So lastly, former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan said, we must ensure that the global market is embedded in broadly shared values and practices that reflect global social needs, and that all the world's people share the benefits of globalization. And here we see an attempt to inject a conscience into the globalization movement, and the perspective that this is not just a race to the bottom to find the lowest possible prices wherever that may exist, but in fact, this is a movement that's trying to lift people around the globe so that everybody can benefit from the trend and more of a shared resource perspective. And we'll see how each of these three quotes, I think, are reflected in what we are going to talk about in scholarly publishing. And so let's get to that. Okay, so globalization is impacting all the areas of the publishing process: editorial, production, sales and marketing, financial, and it presents abundant opportunities and ample challenges for scholarly publishers. So one way that we see globalization impacting scholarly publishing is with international collaboration among authors. We can see that the UK and Germany lead the pack here, with most of their papers authored by international teams. The US comes in next at 40% of articles with international teams of authors. And slowly but surely rising is China, which has a quarter of its papers with authors outside the country. So author teams are increasingly connected. We see that the global volume of articles being published is on the rise. Now, certainly this is something that has been happening for decades, centuries possibly, but the output is accelerating within the last 10 to 20 years. We see that China has surpassed the US and EU in recent years. We see that Latin America, Asia Pacific, Middle East, et cetera, they're starting from a low baseline, but their output is also increasing. And on this slide, we've got the 14 countries with the highest number of articles published between 2018 and 2020. And on the right, we've got a detailed view of those bottom set of countries. I think there's 8 down there, so you can see their output. So another way to look at this is, as China's especially output is rising, the relative share for the US and the EU is decreasing. And as we noted, China recently surpassed the US and the EU. So depending on what data you use, you'll see that passage point occurs at various points in time, but it's safe to say now that there's a consensus that that has occurred. So this is just showing us how specialization in scientific fields differs among countries. The United States, the EU, and Japan more specialized in health sciences. China and India are more specialized in engineering, as measured by journal articles and conference papers. China accounts for a high proportion of research in materials science, chemistry, engineering, and mathematics. The US is more prolific in clinical medicine, basic life sciences, and physics. So here's where things, I think, get pretty interesting when we shine a light on China, because I think most of our clients are aware of the rising output of content from China, but what I think they haven't appreciated is just how much the quality has increased, even in the past 5 to 10 years. When we speak with journal editorial boards, there's people will nod their heads when you talk about China, and they'll appreciate the fact that yes, we're getting more submissions, et cetera, but there's a tendency to want to dismiss that as, for the most part, junk. I'm generalizing here. But when we look at some of these statistics, it's clear that it's not just junk. Really, at the top end of the spectrum, we're seeing a lot of high quality content from China. When you look at Chinese research comprising 27% of the top 1% of most cited papers versus the US at 25%. China's field-weighted citation impact rose to 1.12 in 2020, which means that citations were 12% above the average in 2020. So really, I mean, this is not to say that there isn't also a lot of low quality content coming from China. There certainly is, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But you cannot just dismiss the fact that this is low quality stuff, because it's clearly not the case, and clearly at the top end there's a lot of good stuff. And if you're not actively engaging there, especially in certain fields, you're going to be missing out on a lot of really highly cited content. So we're going to switch gears a little bit just to talk about globalization and the publishing workforce. We know that an international workforce has been prominent in scholarly publishing for years and in a number of roles. Of course, the major multinational publishers mostly are headquartered in Europe with offices in the US. Typesetting, composition, data conversion are often managed in the US with personnel and large staffs in India and the Philippines. Copy editing, mostly done by freelancers or service providers in the US and UK. And we know that large publishers often work with local editors who are focused on content acquisition. So a lot of different roles being staffed globally in the publishing workforce. And here we see that from a revenue standpoint, yes, the US is still the top source of revenue for scholarly publishing at 40%. But looked at another way, 60% of the revenue is coming from elsewhere in the world. So if you're not engaging with the rest of the world, you're going to be missing out on perhaps the majority of that revenue opportunity. So let's talk a little bit about how to optimize journals to succeed in an increasingly global environment. So an exercise that we will often perform on our consulting engagements is working with editorial teams to benchmark the geographic representation of their editorial boards. And when we do this and we look at it from a data standpoint, I think many of our clients are often surprised at what they see, because they have a sense that they are international and global. Maybe they have one or two people from Asia, somebody from Europe, somebody from the Middle East, and they sort of get the sense that they are a global team. But when you look at it from a data standpoint and really see what the percentages are, there's often shown a mismatch between where the content in their journal is coming from and where their editorial board is located. And for a lot of the journals that we work with, they're published by US societies. They tend to skew toward the US. And a lot of that comes from the fact that journal editorial teams tend to depend on their existing relationships when recruiting new people to the board. And we try to help editorial teams work against that temptation. And part of what you can do there to help with that is citation analysis, which really helps you to see what the impact of content from various geographic locations in your field is, and where that good quality content is coming from, which countries, which institutions it's coming from, and which individuals are producing that high quality content. And often they're located in places that you might not expect. And certainly as the industry is becoming more global, those people are increasingly located in places that are, not North America or Europe. And typically what we'll try to do is compare the board's diversity and their geographic diversity with where the content is coming from. And ideally, you like to see more of a match there so that the board representation is a reflection of where that content is coming from, so that you have people on your team who are in the locations where you want to attract content and solicit content. And it's really important to broadcast to your prospective authors that your journal welcomes and will know how to review content in that field. We learned from our market research that that's certainly one of the first places potential and prospective authors are going to look, is at your editorial board listing, your masthead, and look for names that they recognize, that they know are leaders in the field, names that are in their general geographic location that they are familiar with, and just getting the sense that if I send my manuscript to this journal, they're going to know what to do with it, and I'm going to get good quality reviews. Those are the sorts of things that are going through your prospective authors' minds when they think about where to submit. And we work with our teams to try to diversify. So to grow your reviewer database, we certainly saw that this was a challenge, especially during COVID, with the surge in manuscripts that a lot of journals were seeing. It put a lot of stress on the system. Reviewer fatigue was quite an issue. Finding reviewers, getting people to accept invitations and getting those reviews turned around in a timely manner was a problem. And part of the issue here is the editorial boards and the reviewer pools, again, concentrated more in US and Europe than they are globally. And so when you have this surge of papers coming in from around the globe, you're stressing your US and European-based reviewer networks, because the rest of the world is not absorbing the overflow the way that they should be. So there's a mismatch there, leading to reviewer burnout. And so there's an opportunity here to encourage your editorial board to include reviewers on every manuscript from underrepresented countries, asking authors and declining reviewers to suggest alternate referees, encourage authors of accepted manuscripts to become reviewers. And as I mentioned before, there is potential with the increase in manuscripts coming from around the globe. There are people out there who want to game the system, who want to gain an advantage. We know that there are, fake reviewers, fake networks of reviewers to get papers published and cited. And so one thing that you want to do is make sure you're verifying your reviewer identities and staying on top of that. Sorry. Okay, so managing the influx of content from China and the increasing quality of that content. Some tips for working in that space. One is to understand decision-making for Chinese authors. Impact factor is important. Generally, they want to see that you have an impact factor, and the higher that number is, the more likely you are to be favorably considered. There's also a list of journals that the China Academy of Sciences puts out. They favor that list of journals for submitting their content. So you want to try to get on that list if you can. Expanding your academic network in China and building long-term relationships. Recognize that this is a long-term project. It's not going to happen overnight, but if you can identify key individuals and key institutions, especially working within your network to find people in your network who may already have connections to those institutions, because they're going to be better positioned to find the right people, and especially guides you away from any potential fraud issues, or working with people who are not always on the up and up, because that can be a concern when you're working in China, and we'll discuss a little bit more about that in a minute. But working to invite papers, having article series with Chinese guest editors, that's a way to build relationships and work with people who may eventually be candidates to come onto your editorial board, who can connect you to other people who might be potential candidates for your editorial board. Ensure that your board reflects the quality of content that's coming from China. When Chinese authors are looking where to submit, it's going to help you to have a connection there, and for them to see that their country is represented on your editorial board. And then marketing to Chinese authors, social media, including WeChat, the same way that is becoming increasingly a way to drive submissions for the US and Europe and the rest of the world. That's something you want to consider for China. And then ensuring your editorial practices are best practices. Speed, like all authors, they want a fast turnaround. So optimizing that to appeal to the Chinese audience is something that you're going to want to consider. So this is just a nod to the fact that when you're working internationally, there are countries that are on the list of countries that are sanctioned internationally, and you want to consider where those manuscripts are coming from and have a process in place for how to deal with those. And of course, with the conflict in Russia and Ukraine, that's adding a whole new universe of potential authors to consider here. I'm not personally an expert in this particular area, but I do know that you need to be careful when you're dealing with countries that are on that sanctioned list. So, certainly we can help distribute this if you're interested after the talk. Just check my time here. All right, we're just about wrapped up here. So, as open access increases in prominence, ensuring diversity, equity, and inclusion has become a major point of discussion. Certainly transformative agreements that include institutional coverage of APCs are part of the existing paradigm in how we're going to deal with the fact that authors are paying for publishing now. That's part of the mix. We've got Research for Life that offers free or discounts on APCs, waivers that are budgeted or granted for authors from countries or institutions that can't afford to pay. And then some of these new models like Diamond OA where there is no article processing charge. So that's part of how we're going to deal with this. But I think most would agree that we're not yet there in ensuring that in an increasingly OA environment, there isn't going to be bias baked into the system, and that people from under-resourced countries and under-resourced institutions are not going to have a hard time finding ways to get published in quality journals. So increasingly, we're hearing from our clients that there's a recognition that the society may need to step up in ways to help cover APCs from some of these middle ground countries, or even authors from developed countries where that may have trouble paying those fees, and that because they're at under-resourced institutions. So thinking about adding those into the annual budget. Is there a way to find an endowment to pay, cover those costs in perpetuity, finding foundations to support this work, or even sponsors, could be commercial or other types of sponsors that want to be associated with this and help cover the costs in this new paradigm that we are all struggling with, how to manage the transition. So I'll end hopefully in a way that brings everything together. The KGL definition of globalization for scholarly publishing it's manifest in the rising rate of article output from an increasing number of countries, growing multinational author alliances, greater engagement of an international workforce, improving access to content across the world, and intensifying support for DEI initiatives. Hope that's not too trite an ending to try to bring together the various themes in a way that would make sense. And that's what we've got. And I hope that was at least somewhat informative. And I know it's a very surface view, but I'll open it up to questions, and I'll take a look in the chat and see what we've got here. I'll stop the share.
Any questions, comments from anyone? Anybody wants to add anything? Okay. Thank you, Kevin. If I may ask,
can I?
Yes, Julia.
Trying to get my mic off. Can I just double check though, because we've been asked about that. Was really helpful, by the way, Kevin. We found that really helpful because something we're really starting to consider. And we've been asked about Chinese abstracts. Can I just check that it's possible to include those, as long as we put them through in the content that's
on the platform?
uploaded?
Julia, yes. So we do have support for translated abstracts, and we can work with you and show you how to get those encoded properly so that they come through properly. But yeah, that's a built-in feature of the platform.
Brilliant.
Both titles and both translated titles and translated abstracts.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Julia is from Bristol University Press. Maybe before we part, if everybody was kind enough to just kind of maybe turn their video on for a few seconds, and then take Mike's lead in terms of when he's ready to kind of take a screenshot. In the meantime, I'll keep on talking, remind you that the next session is not tomorrow, it's on Thursday. It starts at 9 a.m. and it's a different format. It's a webinar format, so you won't have video or audio capability. It will also not have any waiting room. So it will just start at 9 a.m. when everybody will show up. There won't be kind of an interim 15 minutes before the 9 a.m. call. So even if you don't see any activity, 8:55, don't panic, it will happen, and we'll turn it on at 9 a.m. when everybody is there. And again, we'll encourage you to ask a question in the chat and the question and answer room that we will have set up then, and reminding you also that there's the Ask the Expert session on Friday. We'll be collecting questions. Thank you, Ben, for offering one. We'll add that to the list of questions we'll try to answer on Friday. So thank you again for everybody's participation, and Mike, just lead the group when you're ready to take your screenshot, and then we'll say goodbye to everyone. You're on mute, Mike.
All I said was smile. Everyone did anyway. So one more. Smile. Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and see you on Thursday.